Chapter 26. After Christopher left, Arthur felt sad, but he felt something else too. He got up late and put his pants and shirt on all by himself. He poured a bowl of cereal and only spilled a little bit. When his mom came into the kitchen, he was sitting at the counter eating. "Why, Artie, you're all dressed, and you got your own breakfast. I didn't know you were big enough to do that." She smiled. He smiled back and said, "Yes." She had noticed it too. He was bigger. Things were different at nursery school. Arthur couldn't stop thinking about what Christopher had said. They would travel around the world and write down their adventures. Arthur stood up tall and looked around the room. Teresa was at the snack table, pouring juice. Some of the children were playing with clay, and some were gluing colored paper on cloth. Stevie was playing with the yellow truck, pushing it around in circles. The truck made a high, whining sound, as if it were real. Arthur swallowed. His hands clenched and opened. He went over to Stevie and shouted, "I want that truck!" Everyone turned and stared. "No," Stevie said. "Anyway, you can't talk." "I can too." "Well, it's my turn now." Teresa was watching from the table. "I think it is Arthur's turn," she said calmly, "and he did ask for it." She smiled at Arthur, a great big smile. "Oh, all right." Stevie handed over the truck. "But I want it next." Arthur got down on his hands and knees. He'd asked for the truck, and now he had it. Christopher would be proud of him. He pushed the truck in circles, saying, "Vroom, vroom, vroom." Margaret faked it that day. She told her mom she had a headache, and she slept all morning. When she got up and went down to the kitchen, there was a note on the table. "Gone to take Artie to school, then to work. Hope you feel better. Love, Mom." Margaret made herself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and was starting to pour a glass of Pepsi when the back door opened. "Leon, how come you're not at school? When I found out you weren't there, I left. How come?" Leon leaned forward so that his heavy glasses were only a few inches from Margaret's nose. "I know." "You know what?" "I know about them." "No, you don't. I mean..." Margaret dropped the can of Pepsi and it rolled across the floor, spouting brown liquid. "Damn." She grabbed a paper towel and began to clean up the mess, as if everything were normal. She tried to keep her voice steady. "What are you talking about?" "The rats. I saw them last night with my binoculars. I was spying on you because I wanted to know the truth." "Oh." Margaret stood up slowly. She didn't know what to say. "I saw that they could talk. One of them was talking to Artie, and one of them was wearing a little hat." "Raxo," Margaret murmured. "That's why your calendar was circled. They were coming to visit, and they took you someplace last night. You're under their power, but I'm going to help you break free." "Wait a minute. I've got it all figured out, so you don't need to deny it, Margaret. They are aliens, and they landed in the valley because it's so remote. They took the form of rats, thinking that people would leave them alone. But rats are everywhere, on farms and in cities. That meant they could learn about different ways people live." "No!" Margaret had to shout to make him stop. "You've got it all wrong, Leon. If you'll be quiet for a minute, I'll tell you the truth." "How will I know it's really the truth? Last time you..." "Just shut up and listen." Leon smiled a little smile and shrugged his shoulders. "For once, you sound like your old self. Okay, shoot." "First of all, they're not from outer space. They escaped from a laboratory where they'd been given shots as part of an experiment. The shots were supposed to make them really smart, and they worked. They worked so well that Justin and Nicodemus figured out how to get out of the cages, and they all escaped from NIMH. NIMH, that's the National Institute of Right. You know, I wouldn't have heard of it if they hadn't told me. Anyway, they ended up living on a farm. Later, they decided to move to the valley and become more self-sufficient. They wouldn't have to worry about being caught there either. Leon was staring at her. I've read about experiments like that, he said slowly. In an old Science Digest from Graham's, there was an article about a guy who... He stopped short as if he'd thought of something more important. Where are they? I want to talk to them. You can't. I've got to. You should have introduced me when they first came. You know I'm planning to be a scientist when I grow up. They're already gone. I took them to the amusement park last night, and they left early this morning. All I have left is their picture. Let me see it. Leon's tone was demanding, and he looked upset. Here. She produced the little square from the pocket of her pajamas. That's Raxo with the hat, and this is Christopher. He's crazy about Artie. Leon looked at the picture only long enough to make sure it was real. Then he headed for the door. Which way did they go? I want to catch up with them. Whoever discovers them will be famous. You don't understand, Leon. They saved my life. They're my friends. Yeah, and I used to be your friend until you met them, and then I wasn't important anymore. Not like them or Eleanor. Leon, please. I wanted to tell you more than anything. I wanted to sit with you, but I was afraid you'd figure it out. I don't even like Eleanor. I'm going to find them, even if I have to ride my bike all the way to the valley. You can't do that, please. Her voice rose in a wail, but Leon went out the door without looking back. Chapter 27. Lindsay Scott heard the phone ring just as she was leaving to go to lunch. She went back into her office and picked it up. The voice at the other end of the line was strange. Who? Margaret. Margaret Livingstone? Yes, I remember you. You gave me your phone number the night you interviewed me? Margaret had to choke back tears. You said if I wanted to talk to you more? I remember. I need your help. I know this sounds crazy, but you've been to the valley yourself. I need you to take me there. But the last road is miles away from... Lindsay stopped herself. Why? I have a friend who's on his way there now, and I have to catch up with him. It's urgent. If I don't stop him, something terrible could happen. Do your parents know about this? There's not time to tell them, not right now. I'm not sure they even want to know the truth. The truth? Lindsay paused. Does the truth have anything to do with rats? There was a silence on the other end of the phone. Hello, Margaret? Yes, said the girl in a faint voice. It does. Margaret was waiting in front of the house when Lindsay pulled up. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, and her hair looked uncombed. She jumped into the front seat and slammed the door. Who is it we're looking for? My friend Leon. He's a skinny black kid with glasses, and he's riding a red 10-speed. Which way did he go? That way, Margaret pointed. He left a half hour ago. It's a long way to the valley. Hours and hours. Please, hurry. We have to find him. Okay, we'll head out Route 15, but while I'm driving, I want you to tell me what's going on. The story was so incredible that Lindsay would never have believed it if it hadn't fit so perfectly with the other pieces of the puzzle. The girl even knew Dr. Schultz's name, and she was a different child from the one Lindsay had met on the night of the interview, frightened and intense. Her face was pressed against the car window. Where could he be? I don't know. I don't think he could have got farther than this in a half hour. Could he have gone another way? Lindsay frowned. I don't think so. This is the only road that heads towards the valley. But he may not have known that. Or maybe... She paused. Maybe he was just trying to scare you. Maybe he didn't really plan to go there at all. I saw him get on his bike, and he was wearing a knapsack. Let's turn around and look again. We must have missed him. They drove back slowly, checking both sides of the road, but there was no sign of Leon. They even stopped in front of his garage to see if he had come back, but the door was open, and his bike was still gone. I've got to find him. Margaret twisted her hands in front of her. I hurt his feelings by lying to him, and now he's really mad. You lied about the valley? She nodded. I promised them I would. They're afraid if Dr. Schultz finds out about them, he'll put them back in the laboratory. For them, that's death. What if someone else went in his place, just to talk with them? I guess that would be okay. Margaret looked as if she were about to cry. Lindsay put one arm around her. We'll find him. They drove out Route 15 again, this time stopping to ask at gas stations. No one had seen a black boy on a red bicycle. Margaret was ready to give up when she thought of something. I know this sounds crazy, but I thought of another place we could look. Where? It's downtown, next to an office building, 1362 Reed Street. What makes you think Leon might be there? It's a long story. Margaret's voice trembled. You see, his grandma used to live there, and we used to visit her. But this summer, while I was away, she died. She loved Leon a lot, and he loved her too. He left so upset. I thought that maybe if he did change his mind about going to the valley, he might... It's worth a try. Lindsay turned the car toward downtown. They didn't talk on the way there, but when they reached the high-rise, Margaret showed Lindsay how to drive around back and up the alley. There, next to the towering brick building, was a tiny wooden house. It was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence, and leaning against the fence was a red bicycle. Margaret jumped out and motioned for Lindsay to stay put. She climbed the fence in long, easy strides, swung over the top, and dropped. The back door was locked, but a window on the side was partly opened. She climbed through. Leon? There was no answer. The familiar walls looked down at her. Pictures of Leon as a baby, a toddler, Leon sitting in front of a birthday cake, Leon holding a bunch of red balloons, Leon holding a trophy from the science fair. The yellow cloth on the kitchen table was dusty, and the coal stove wasn't polished the way it used to be. Leon, she called. Her voice echoed through the empty rooms. He had to be here. She poked her head into each room, climbed the stairs and checked there too. Finally, she went up the worn steps to the attic. He was facing the door when she came in. He looked scared. Did you change your mind about going to the valley? He nodded. It's too far away. Anyway, I didn't want you to end up hating me. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry about everything. Leon looked at the floor. I had a terrible summer, he said in a high, choked voice. First, Graham died, and then you died too. When it turned out you weren't dead, I was so happy. But when you came back, you were different. But that's over, and now you know the truth. Margaret swallowed. You can cry if you want to, she said softly. I did, when Nicodemus left, and lots of other times too. No, but a tear ran down Leon's cheek. He wiped it away with his fist. I'm going to take you there sometime, Leon. I promise. You'll like them a lot. They've got their own world there with crops and schools and doctors and everything. They'll like you too. I know because I already told them about you. I even told them about this house. You did? Yep. I told them about the stuff we used to do here in the summer, like flying paper planes from the roof, and what your Gram said to the people who complained. What did they say? They said we were lucky. They were silent for a moment. Then Margaret said, I really did want to tell you right from the moment I got back. Having to keep it to myself was awful. I was going to tell my mom, but I found out she hates rats, so I couldn't. Then you figured it out. I was so worried about your going to the valley that I called Lindsay. It turned out she'd almost figured it out too. Who's Lindsay? She's a reporter, and she's been to the valley before to write about it. She was helping me look for you. She's outside in her car. She's outside? Margaret nodded. Does she know the part about NIMH? Yeah. She'd even talked to the guy who did the experiment. His name is Dr. Schultz. Is she going to tell him? I don't think so. She's nice, but I have to talk to her more about that. You better. Reporters usually write articles about whatever they find out. They walked together down the 2 flights of stairs to the kitchen. Margaret stopped there, remembering the afternoon meals of coconut cake and lemonade Leon's grandmother had made for them. He wasn't the only one who missed her. She told him so, and he nodded. He put out one hand with the palm up. Friends? She slapped it hard. Friends! They climbed out the window, pulled it shut, and climbed over the fence. Lindsay put her head out the car window. Everything okay? Yep, Margaret smiled. You must be Leon. I am. Together, they fitted the bike in the trunk and got into the front seat. On the way home, they talked about the valley. Margaret didn't try to hide anything. She told about Nicodemus and Raxo, and Christopher and Justin and Beatrice and Isabella. She talked about the hawk's nest and the gardens and the wheat field. She talked so much she thought she would run out of words, but there were always more things to tell, things that had been bottled up inside her for weeks. And Lindsay listened. Even when her thoughts had strayed to the unbelievable, she hadn't imagined the story Margaret was telling now. She wanted to question every word, but she also just wanted to listen. Margaret told about the visit. She told about the amusement park and the merry-go-round and the tilt-a-whirl and the photo booth. She started to tell about their supper when Lindsay interrupted her. You have a picture of you and the rats? Yes, it's at home in the pocket of my pajamas. I showed it to you, didn't I, Leon? I'd like to see that picture, Lindsay said. She added, remember when we were looking for Leon on the road? You told me that the rats were afraid of Dr. Schultz because they thought he would put them back in the laboratory. Margaret nodded. What if someone went in his place just to talk to them? Margaret didn't say anything. Well, I think it would be okay if the person were nice and promised not to hurt them or tell where they lived. What if you went with me? If it were okay with your parents, that is. Me too, Leon said. Don't forget about me. Him too. Margaret nodded, but she wondered what her parents would say when they knew the truth. And the rats, would they welcome Leon and Lindsay to the valley? The valley. The thought of being there again filled her with joy. Chapter 28. The person Margaret worried most about after she told the secret was Artie. She wondered if he'd understand or if he'd just think she was terrible. How she'd scolded him the night he'd shouted at the rat in the alley. If only she could take back the things she'd said. She went upstairs to talk to him. You see, Artie, Leon figured it out, and he was going there by himself. So I called Lindsay for help. I didn't mean to tell her. I just wanted to find Leon. But it turned out she asked about them. And when we were together, the truth came pouring out. She looked at Artie. He was sitting in his little rocking chair, looking at his sneakers. She went on nervously. Lindsay's nice. She wants to go to the valley, and she wants you and me and Leon to go with her. She won't hurt the rats or tell where they live. Artie didn't say anything. I wish I hadn't told her, but I didn't know what else to do. Margaret swallowed. Arthur looked up and saw that Margaret was afraid. Until this summer, he hadn't even known that she cared about him, and now she was afraid. It's okay, he said softly. Lindsay told Margaret's parents. Margaret didn't want to go into the living room where they were talking. When they came out, her mom and dad looked at her as if they weren't sure what to think. Lindsay arranged for Margaret's dad to come with them to the valley. He hugged her and said, "Your mom and I have agreed that what happened while you were gone isn't the most important thing to us. The important thing is that you're here." Margaret felt a little hurt by the doubt in his voice. Wait till you see the valley, Dad. You'll love it. And the rats. Her mom put one hand to her mouth. Oh, Margaret, she said. They boarded a helicopter on a Saturday morning in early spring. Margaret, Arthur, and their dad, Leon, Lindsay, and Dave Castle, her editor, with a camera around his neck. Lindsay hadn't wanted Dave to come, but he was set on having pictures, although he'd promised not to reveal where the rats lived. They had to wait until spring because it was impossible to land in the valley during the winter. Margaret squirmed in her seat. She couldn't help thinking that the trip was a mistake. Now they were rising above the city. The streets and buildings looked like the little pieces in a board game. Leon pointed. There's the stadium, and there's the zoo. He grinned, his face bright with excitement. Margaret smiled back, but a little voice in her head said, What if the rats aren't glad to see us? Look, Artie, Leon gestured out the window. There's a school. See the track? That's a farm. Remember what cows say? Moo, Artie said abruptly. He didn't feel like talking. He wondered when they would get to the valley. He wondered if Christopher knew he was coming. Christopher would like the helicopter. Look, Leon pointed up ahead. That's the state forest. See all the trees? You can see the mountains just beyond. Sure enough, Margaret could see the contours of the land rising. Outcroppings of rock dotted the ridges. The forest was green and brown, covered with tiny bare sticks that were really the trunks of trees far below. There's snow on some of the mountains. Look, there and there. Now even Arthur was straining to see. Margaret wondered which cliff she'd climb to get to the hawk's nest. She looked for the mouth of the cave where they'd met Christopher, but from so high up, the mountains all looked alike. The helicopter hovered over the ridge, then flew across. Margaret wondered if the rats had seen it yet. Below were the sides of the mountains, rock strewn and brown. Beyond them was the floor of the valley. Lindsay had said they would land in the meadow north of Emerald Pond and walk along the creek. Margaret had tried to draw maps showing how to get to the nest, but it was hard to remember how the creek curved. Look, there's the meadow. Margaret was excited despite herself. She felt like shouting to the rats. It's us, Margaret and Artie. She punched Leon on the arm and he grinned. We're coming down, the pilot said. Make sure your seatbelts are fastened tight. The helicopter touched ground, jolted, and was still. Outside the window was a field covered with brown grass, and above it a brilliant blue sky. The passengers stood up. Margaret realized that everyone was nervous. The pilot unbolted the door and lowered a set of black steps to the ground. Why don't you go first? Lindsay suggested. That way, if they're watching, they'll know who we are. They'll be watching. They have a sentry tower beyond the garden. She went down the steps. The cold air hit her first, and she gasped. It was still winter here. She gazed over the landscape. There, to her left, were the mountains that stood between the valley and the state forest. Beneath them, clumps of green, were the pines and cedars. Then the mixed brown of thickets, the bare tree trunks, the meadow grass. To the right and ahead, the silhouette of the stream curved in a thick, wavy line. The pond was hidden by a dip in the ground. She thought the top of the tower would be visible from here, but she couldn't see it. She took a few steps, a lump in her throat. Then the others were down too. Lindsay blinked. She had forgotten the stark beauty of the valley, framed by dark mountains on both sides. Arthur had that blank look that meant, "Don't speak to me." Leon was like a burr at Margaret's side, asking questions. The others were quiet. We go this way to get to the nest. Margaret gestured in the direction of the stream. Once we cross it, over by that walnut tree there are stepping stones. We'll be able to see Emerald Pond. The gardens are just beyond it. They walked single file, the frosty grass dampening their shoes. Deer tracks were frozen in the winter mud, and raccoons had left their handprints along the shore of the creek. The stepping stones were there, just as Margaret had remembered. There! The pond lay before them, green and glassy, like a bright eye. There was ice around the edges. But the diving platform is gone. Margaret couldn't hide her disappointment. Had they taken it down for the winter? She led the others around to the right. There she saw something even stranger. The dam, which she had helped build, had disappeared. She ran along the bank looking. Here was the exact spot where they had built it, with the sandbank to one side and the rocky shelf on the other. But the stones were gone, gone from the water, not even tumbled up on the bank where ice had dislodged them. She stared. What is it? Leon asked quickly. She shook her head. She couldn't answer. Not yet. She hurried on, not waiting for the others. She came to the edge of the gardens. The carefully manicured plots of cabbages, beets, onions, and carrots were gone. There was only dirt with a few stones in it. There were no beehives, and where Margaret remembered a row of blackberry bushes, only one scraggly plant remained. There was no sign of the rats had ever lived there. Only the brown meadow grass, the mud, here and there a bedraggled clump of vines. It was here, Margaret whispered. What? Their garden! She moved her arm in a circle in front of them. The broccoli was over there. I remember because Artie stepped on it by accident, and the potatoes were here, and the cabbages right there, and the water pipe came up just about there. That was for the hot months, in case there wasn't enough rain. And the bamboo they made the pipes out of grew there. She held her arm still, then let it drop. Leon looked at her doubtfully. Are you sure we're in the right spot? She nodded. The nest is on the other side of that grove of pines. It was, at least. He glanced over one shoulder. Here come the others. She had almost forgotten about them. She didn't want to see them now. She turned and ran, Leon beside her. Come on. She ran through the pine grove, slowing down enough to notice that the clearing contained a massive bramble. The paved walk that led to the grove was gone. She found the clay bank where the nest had been. The doors and windows were smoothed out. Even the little bamboo faucet that had gotten Arthur into so much trouble was gone. Margaret was flooded with disappointment. The valley had changed. Where are they? She whispered. I think they ran away, Leon said. But why? They were afraid of being caught. I would never hurt them, never. You wouldn't. They know that, and I wouldn't. We're just kids. But the others, Lindsay's nice. But her boss or the pilot? Leon shrugged. They couldn't be sure who would come. Margaret, her dad was standing with Lindsay and Dave beside the pine grove. She walked back slowly. They're not here, she said. Lindsay took a step toward her, as if she wanted to help. But what about the gardens and the nest and the other places you told me about? It's all changed. The gardens were right over there. Dave walked over to where the lettuce and spinach should be. It's full of rocks, he said. He picked some up and showed them. Honey, are you sure we're in the right place? Her dad put his hands on her shoulders, staring into the blue wool of his jacket. Margaret remembered the rows of beets and onions and lettuces laid out so neatly in the dark, crumbling earth. Yet here there were only mud and stones and brambles. I don't know, she murmured. I just don't know. She showed them the other places, the nest, the wheat field, the dam. They were all changed or gone. She felt as if she were in a dream, except that it was real and now. And suddenly the summer seemed unreal, as if it had never happened at all. But you have the picture? Lindsay said gently. Remember, the one you took at the amusement park? The picture, Margaret nodded dumbly. The others were standing around her in a circle. She wanted to run away, but she couldn't. Then suddenly she felt what it must be like to be trapped once and for all. Inside a cage, you wouldn't see the sun or moon, feel the earth under your feet, feel the rain or wind or dew. Of course they had run away, and she would do nothing else that would let them be found. The picture, Margaret repeated. It wasn't real. Lindsay looked at her oddly, as if she sensed the change. Leon salt too? It was in the pocket of your pajamas? No. Lindsay looked at Leon. He looked down at the ground, and then he looked at Margaret. I never saw it, he said. They stood together silently. Dave put the camera in his coat pocket. Then her dad stepped out of the circle and hugged her tight. It's okay, honey, he said. They left the valley an hour later. Margaret didn't want to go. She was held by memories, sunny days, hard work, the smell of pine needles, the taste of creek water, the feel of rock under her hands and knees. She had come from one world into another, rising from one armchair in front of the television to pass through a door into a life she couldn't have imagined. The rats had been part of that, of course, but even if she never saw them again, she closed her eyes tight when she thought of that, even if she didn't. She had learned from the valley itself. Leon sat beside her on the ride home. When their eyes met, Margaret put one finger to her lips. Later, she murmured. He nodded slightly. The helicopter brought them back over the mountains and forest, over the green pastures to the suburbs and into the city itself. Like a metal bug, it hovered over factories and skyscrapers, schools and offices. Before they landed, Lindsay put one hand on Margaret's shoulder. You have my phone number? She said softly. Margaret nodded. She kept her eyes straight ahead. A moment later, they got off. Her mother was in the car waiting for them. What happened? She asked. They were gone, Margaret said. Oh. Her mom looked surprised, but relieved too. She squeezed Margaret's hand. Tell me about it later, she said. Dinner's in the oven. If we leave right now, it will be ready when we get home. Chapter 29. Arthur didn't tell anyone about the trip to the valley, but he thought a lot about what happened there. He decided to write it in his book. He waited until Saturday morning when the rest of the family slept late. He opened the closet door and went in. He pushed through the row of clothes in the front and went back under the eaves. It was very cold. On a hook behind the coat hangers, he found one of Margaret's old sweaters, a brown one with Popeye on the front. He put it on over his sleeper pajamas. He got the black crayon from the windowsill. That was when he noticed the picture. It was an ice picture on the inner surface of the storm window. Arthur had seen them before. They appeared in cold weather and were made of patches of frost and ice crystals. When he asked his mom, she said fairies made them, but he didn't believe in fairies. This picture was special. The frost formed jagged peaks like mountains, and each peak was covered with tiny blossoms, the crystals themselves. Beyond the mountains was an oblong sphere made up of tiny drops of water, a lake or perhaps a river. But this was the strangest part. There was a boat on it. The mast was another line of water, tall and thin. Beside it was the faint shadow of the sail, and the hull itself shaped like a pointed shoe. Arthur stared. Why, that's the boat Christopher and I are going to sail on, he thought. Christopher said we'll sail around the world one day, and here's the boat to prove it. He got to work on the story. He made his lines carefully, thick ones, curly ones, loops and squiggles. He told about the valley as it had been this time, the brown grass, the empty garden, the thicket in the pine grove. He told how Margaret had lied about the picture and how Leon had lied too. The grown-ups had been upset and wanted to go home. He told how he had slipped away for a moment while they were talking, looking back to make sure they weren't watching. He had trotted down the stream to the oak tree. He pulled the vines away from the base, searching for a present from Christopher. There wasn't a feather or a pretty rock or even a bit of bread with honey on it. At first he was disappointed, but then his fingers touched something. He looked again. There, drawn in the frozen dirt under the vines, was an arrow. It pointed toward the slopes that rose farther down the valley, where the mountains grew steeper and closer together. So that's the way they went, he thought. He took a stick and scratched the arrow out so no one else would see it. After all, it was his secret, his and Christopher's. He stopped writing and examined his work. He added a dot, a backward loop. Here, at the part about the arrow, he drew a picture. Would he tell Margaret? He stood still, considering. Maybe one day, if he felt like it. It was hard to say. He shivered. It was chilly in the closet, even with her sweater. And furthermore, he was hungry. He set the crayon back on the windowsill. His stomach growled, and he left the closet, closing the door behind him. He thought he heard his mother getting up. He would like toast, he decided. Toast and cereal and orange juice. He headed down the hall to let her know. The end.